everyone, this is Rick, and today we'll be interviewing Anna Gabriella Casalme, who's the CEO and founder of Novelly, an edtech nonprofit that is creating youth-led spaces, both online and offline, for courageous conversations. Novelly's mission is to equip all young people, regardless of race or socioeconomic status, with the confidence to engage in nuanced dialogue on the complicated issues of our time, and empower them to use their voices to shape our future. Hey Anna, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well as your company Novelly?
For sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me. So my name is Anna Casalme, and I'm the founder and CEO of Novelly, which is an edtech nonprofit. And we're on a mission to create youth-driven spaces, both online and offline, for courageous conversations. Especially right now, we're seeing a lot of teenagers in the United States who are worried more about their future than they were maybe 6 or 7 months ago. And a survey had found that teenagers today are super worried about coronavirus, understandably, racism, the upcoming election, and climate change, among so many other issues. And what we do is we provide that space for them to process it without the extreme polarization and hostility that they're surrounded by, and that these issues are often discussed with. So it's been about a year and a half, and we've launched a mobile app as well as programs that encapsulate it. And that's how we tackle this online versus offline blend of learning. And that's our approach.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And so I've read a little bit about the founding story on your website, and it seems that there wasn't one event, but a series of experiences that led to the founding of Novelly. So could you walk me through the story a bit more, and perhaps what was the final reason, the final force that pushed you to start Novelly?
Definitely. It's exactly as you said. So I was a senior at Stanford, and I was working on my honors thesis. I was pre-med, and my major was human biology, but I always had this passion for education, and that was what I decided to do my thesis on. So I wanted to take a look at inclusive classrooms. I was very concerned about the mental health of students with disabilities. So I thought, okay, instead of trying to focus on solving the problem through young people with disabilities, how about creating inclusive classrooms so that they don't have to experience bullying in the first place? So I took this book. I took a children's book called Wonder into these classrooms, and found that by using a book, it made it a lot easier for middle schoolers to have conversations about a topic as complicated as disability. And I was just very warmed by that and found that it could create inclusive classrooms. The same thing, or during that same year, what had also happened was that Brock Turner had sexually assaulted an unconscious young woman. And it was I don't know if you remember it, but it was a huge national news story. And I realized that, oh man, there's so many topics, not just disability, that we need to talk about with young people if we have any chance at solving them. So I realized that the findings of this thesis was applicable to a lot of different things. And I took that with me. Clearly, I did not end up going to medical school because I was really excited about this idea. I did work at a community health center, and I was called on to do some sexual violence prevention workshops, and did the same thing. I brought books, talked about it, found the same results, which I found really inspiring and great. So that was the journey for a couple years. Still wasn't sure what to do with it, but what ended up prompting me to actually start something was when I received money, which I think is a great reason to push you to actually do something about it when someone believes in you enough to fund it. I submitted this idea. I thought, okay, clearly there's something here. And I submitted it to a competition with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And to my surprise, they said, we want to fund this. We want to see what comes out of it. So that's how I ended up getting started.
That's awesome. And so what would you say was the most challenging moment for you so far in starting and running Novelly?
It's so funny. I think when I got the email saying that I had gotten the funding, I I remember I was at a bar in Scotland where I was living at the time, and I was with a friend, and I just started sobbing on the floor of this pub, and I was so happy. But the weird thing was that only a week later, I started freaking out because I realized, oh my gosh, I actually have to create a whole organization and product as a result of this. So I would say that those first few months were so hard because I just felt so alone, and I had a lot of self-doubt and feelings of imposter syndrome because I started to doubt whether or not I deserved to have this funding, and I didn't have a team behind me, at least not yet. Just like all of these thoughts kept creeping in, like I don't actually know how apps work, which is a weird thing to realize that you don't know how apps or the internet or all of these things you rely on at a day-to-day basis actually work. So that was a very tough period, was that beginning period.
And kind of on the flip side, what has been the best or most satisfying moment for you?
I think, and this is very much credit to my sister. So my sister was actually the first person that I talked to about this idea maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I remember where was I? So it was during this pandemic, maybe back in June, and I was approving proofs for the App Store screenshots. And my sister, she just came up to me and was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I showed her like, "Oh, I'm just approving the final screenshots from our UX UI designer." And my sister said, "Oh my gosh, are you like fully comprehending this moment? Like, are you soaking it in? Like you had told me about a vague idea a long time ago, and isn't it crazy that it's actually like you're here, like approving the final App Store screenshots?" And I guess I never thought about it, but then when she put it that way, I was super happy to realize that, oh yes, we still have a long way to go, but we brought something to fruition and made it real.
Love that. And so where are you right now along your startup journey? Like, I know that Novelly is a nonprofit, but I assume there's still a question of survival and being able to pay your team members as well as yourself. So is that still something that's constantly on your mind, or have you moved past the phase?
Always. I feel like fundraising is 90% of my job sometimes. And it's a question that I get all the time, is why a nonprofit versus a for-profit? And I think that question and the answer to it really depends on who you want to be working with. And for me, I really actually enjoy making or creating partnerships with foundations and corporations. And I think the brand partnership is just as valuable as the funding side of it. So I actually really enjoy that aspect. And and also, of course, like being able to put our social impact as our first and foremost priority. But yes, fundraising is a huge concern. And especially during this pandemic, we've had to think about, not just grants. We've relied on grants from foundations, the government, and corporations, but what to do when those people are pushing their funding towards healthcare and things that are a huge need right now, and understandably so. So we have started looking at recurring individual donors and looking into asking, our beneficiaries to contribute a small amount. There's been a good response to that. So I think we'll be able to keep going in that direction where we'll have a diversified set of revenue streams.
That's awesome. And do you have a role model? And if so, what have you learned from them that you apply to your company?
I like to pretend that I have a lot of mentors. I mean, not that I don't, but I think like if you really admire someone like Melinda Gates, who I do, pretend that she's my mentor by watching all of her interviews and reading her book. But I really admire Sophia Amoruso, who founded Nasty Gal, and I read her book, which I really needed at the time. So it was in that first few months, and she had an epiphany, and she shared that story where she stopped being afraid of failure. And that helped me so much because it helped me think of it instead of I'm under pressure to make this thing succeed, and to think of it more as like I had the courage to ask a question and find the answer to it. And that's what I am being asked to do right now, is to find the answer to a question, which is, will this work? So I found that really helpful to think like, okay, I'm not supposed to make it into a big thing. I'm just here to like pursue my curiosity. Another person I really admire is Melanie Perkins, who's a co-founder of Canva. I just admire what they've built so much. And I love the principle of making design accessible to everyone. And I think that's something that we're very much in the spirit of, is making courageous conversations and dialogue accessible to everyone, regardless of where you're at.
And do you have any advice for someone like me who is still a student, but I'm interested in entrepreneurship and wants to potentially start something of my own in the future?
And I feel like my answer to this changes depending on the day and how I feel. But right now, I'm very much in a spirit of being graceful and gracious to yourself. So I think if you find yourself kind of like all over the place, pursuing lots of different ideas, getting distracted or unfocused, I would challenge you to not think of that as a bad thing, because it took me 4 years to actually turn Novelly into an organization, but I had the idea in my mind for a really long time. And I don't think of that as wasted time, actually. I know people say like, oh, if you have an idea, you need to move fast and break things. But I think it's okay to keep letting the idea evolve, to talk to people, to pursue diverse experiences that could support your skills and your ability to actually make it happen. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, and it actually could help a lot. The other thing I would say is talk to a lot of people, which I didn't know that not a lot of people do. But for the past 5 years, I would say that I just spent a lot of time talking to people and actually making myself really vulnerable to feedback about it, getting my idea in the faces of all the different people that I thought might be interested in it.
Gotcha. And so I've also gathered some questions from my audience. The first one is, how do you handle the stress associated with running a startup?
Oh, that's an ongoing challenge. Still trying to figure out how to do it. If this wasn't a pandemic, I used to get a lot of massages and would be willing to spend a lot of money on the gym for the most part. But I think the main thing is to just create a friend group of other founder friends. And I feel super, super grateful to have a couple friends who I know I could call when I'm just not having a great day. And it's going to happen. It's like such an up and down experience that a bad day is coming, and you need to be prepared for that by having friends on speed dial who you can talk to, and who most importantly will understand and be able to empathize and give you some either very blunt feedback or just a very kind response that you might need.
That's awesome. And do you have any book or podcast recommendations?
Gosh, I know. Well, of course, anything that Tim Ferriss creates, I think, is just of the highest quality. And you can really feel how much work he puts into everything. This whole thing about getting mentors who you might not actually know personally, tribe of mentors, is literally what the concept of that is. Tim Ferriss is great. I would also invest in just your personal development. Like, social skills is so undervalued. So podcasts like Art of Charm, I think, is really good, or a YouTube channel like Charisma on Command. I know it's kind of weird, or it might feel very weird at first to study your social skills, but it's crazy how often you can get passed up for funding if you don't have the ability to really understand your social situation and how people are perceiving you or how you're coming off. So I wouldn't underplay that at all, and would look into really looking into your own personal development.
Gotcha. And before we end, I also have some rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what time do you usually wake up every morning?
Recently, 8 a.m. Pre-pandemic, maybe 7.
Mm-hmm. And if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Teleportation, for sure.
If you could have dinner with anyone, who would you choose?
Barack and Michelle Obama.
Mm-hmm. And what's the best advice you've ever received?
The co-founder of Serum told me that you should have strong opinions loosely held. And I've carried that with me. Have a clear enough vision and a strong conviction with what you're saying, but be willing to switch gears and seem like a crazy person when you tell your team, we're doing this now.
That's awesome. So to wrap up today's interview, I wanted to end with a question. And you mentioned this earlier too. So 2020 has obviously been pretty chaotic, especially in the States with COVID-19 and George Floyd and more recently Jacob Blake. So do you have any words of advice for today's youth as to how we can be better engaged and make a difference in today's world?
Yeah, I just first want to say, God, it's rough, and I completely get it. I can't even imagine being a college student or high school student right now, coming into the school year, just trying to understand what is going on, what's going to happen in my classes. So first off, I just want to say, it's rough, and allow yourself to not do everything that you might have imagined for this upcoming school year. But in terms of advice, I know it's very easy to say from a privileged place, but if you could imagine or reflect on what might be possible now that wasn't possible before. So if you find yourself with some freed up time, maybe testing a business idea on a small scale, create that YouTube channel that you always said you would, but you haven't had the time to. Maybe there's an opportunity here that is waiting to be found, and you just don't know it yet.
That's awesome. Well, that's it for today's interview. Thank you, Anna, for taking the time to do this. I wish you and Novelty the best of luck and stay safe.
Thank you. Yeah, same to you guys as well.